Okay, so, we always love it when you send us stuff to dig into. And, this whole idea about how business leadership, does it or does it not apply to running a government? I mean, it's a really interesting one.
It is.
It's
And especially, what you pointed out, which is this kind of assumption that if someone can be successful in the business world,
right.
that means they can automatically lead, a whole diverse country or society or whatever. And that's really, I think, what we're going to kind of delve into here.
Yeah, and one of the things that jumped out at me right away in looking at the stuff you sent was this idea of change. I mean, one of the sources even defined it just as kind of like alteration, over time.
Well, yeah, and what's so interesting about that is that the source you sent seemed to be saying it's everywhere, right? It's not just, governments change and businesses change. It's even like our DNA, and it's like the laws of physics and like logic and math, and it's even like how we think and what we believe.
It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it that way, right? Like everything is constantly in flux.
Yeah.
But I think, as that source kind of suggests, like understanding that really basic idea that change is always happening kind of helps us understand why, running a company and steering it through changes in customers or whatever it is might be so different from trying to guide, all the different people in a society through their own changes and challenges.
Right.
So let's get into it then. I mean, what is it about successful business people that makes people think, oh yeah, you'd be great at running a country?
Right.
What are those appealing qualities we always hear?
Well, the sources you sent, they all mentioned a few of the same things.
Yeah.
People were saying, business leaders, they're efficient. They can streamline processes and get stuff done. They're effective.
Right.
They actually, make things happen.
Right.
They're decisive. They don't like, hem and haw. They make decisions.
Right.
And they make them fast. And they think strategically. They can think long term. They have a vision for where they want to go.
Yeah.
And they have like a plan to get there. And then they're really results oriented. They want to, see measurable success and growth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those sound like good qualities for any leader, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's what I don't get then. What is it about, putting a business person in charge of a government that makes people nervous?
Right.
What are the red flags?
Yeah, well, and one of the sources you sent kind of summed this up really nicely, I thought.
Okay.
They basically just compared, like, what's the goal?
Okay.
Who are you trying to help? And then how do you actually do it?
Okay, so the goal first.
Yeah, so in business, I mean, it's pretty simple, right? The goal is
make money.
To make money, right? To maximize profit and increase the value for the shareholders.
Yeah.
But then when you think about running a government, a democratic government,
It's very different.
It's a completely different goal.
Yeah.
It's all about serving the people, the public.
Right.
All of the citizens and making sure everybody is doing okay.
Right. And that kind of leads into the second point, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who are you actually serving?
Yeah, in business, you're mainly focused on, the shareholders.
Right.
The people who own the company, your customers, the people buying your product, your employees, the people who work for you.
Yeah.
But when you're running a government, it's like...
It's everybody.
It's everybody.
Yeah.
Right? There's all the citizens, all those different people with their own needs and beliefs and priorities. And that includes, like, people who might not have a lot of money or power, people who maybe nobody's listening to.
Right.
So it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah. And how you make decisions is also different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So in business, it's, you analyze the market,
right.
you look at the numbers and you make, the decision that makes the most financial sense.
Right.
But in a democratic government, it should be more about, listening to different opinions, different viewpoints, having debates, trying to reach some kind of agreement.
Yeah, a consensus.
Right. And it's supposed to be done, according to the law and the Constitution.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just not something businesses really have to worry about in the same way.
And who are you accountable to?
Yeah, that's another big one.
In business, it's, the shareholders.
Right. The market.
The market, if the company's not doing well,
you're going to hear about it. Yeah, but in a democracy, you're accountable to the voters, the people who put you in office.
Right.
And it's more than that, too.
Yeah.
You're accountable to the Constitution, to the rule of law.
Right.
And to all these checks and balances that are supposed to keep you from, abusing your power. So it's a much bigger responsibility.
And transparency is different, too.
Oh, yeah.
in business. You don't always want to tell everyone what you're doing.
Right. You got to keep your secrets.
You keep your secrets.
You don't want the competition knowing what your plans are.
Right. But in government,
right,
you're supposed to be transparent.
You got to be open.
So people can see what's going on.
Right, and hold you accountable.
Right, and trust you.
Exactly.
And time horizons are different too.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, a business is thinking, okay.
Short term.
Next
quarter, next year.
How are we doing this year? How are we going to do next year?
You got to keep those profits going up.
Right, but governments should be thinking.
Long term.
What's
going to happen 10 years from now?
Right.
20 years from now, 50 years from now.
Yeah, what kind of world are we leaving for?
Right. What kind of world are we creating?
Our kids and grandkids?
For the next generation and the generation after that.
And then how do you decide where the money goes?
Resource allocation.
Yeah.
Yeah. In business, you put the money where it's going to make the most money.
Right.
Where there's a demand, supply and demand.
Right. But government should be looking at it more like, what do people need?
Right.
What are the priorities?
And how do we make society better for everyone?
And the idea of competition is different too, right?
Yeah,
businesses they want to
win.
They want to win.
Need the competition.
Get the biggest market share.
Right.
Right.
Crush the other guy.
Right. But government should be more about
cooperation,
working together.
Working for the benefit of everyone.
For everybody, right.
Right, not competing with the people you're supposed to be serving.
Exactly. And this kind of brings up something that the listener who sent us this stuff mentioned, which was this kind of skepticism about capitalism and how it can have all these loopholes and ways to cheat.
Right. Well, yeah, and the sources kind of touch on that by saying, when the main goal is just to make as much money as possible.
Right.
That doesn't always lead to ethical behavior.
Right. And the source even gives us specific examples.
Yeah, like sometimes companies prioritize profit over, the well-being of their employees.
Right, or their customers.
Or the environment. Right. And the role of government is to protect those things.
Right.
The people, the environment.
And the source also mentioned that sometimes things that are really important for society don't always make a lot of money.
Right.
Things like the arts or scientific research or, helping people who are struggling.
Social safety nets.
Yeah. And a business person might look at those things and be like,
why are we wasting money on this?
Yeah. Cut.
Right. Got to focus on the bottom line.
But those things are important
for crucial.
A healthy society.
For a healthy society. Yeah.
And the source even said that this whole idea of being efficient, which is so important in business, could actually be bad for democracy.
Well, yeah, because in a democracy, you need to have those debates.
Right.
You need to hear different opinions.
Yeah.
You need to reach a consensus, and that takes time.
It does.
It can be messy. It can be slow.
Right.
But it's important for making sure everybody feels heard.
Right. And the decisions are legitimate.
Right, exactly.
And a business leader might just be like,
let's just do this.
Yeah, let's just get it done.
Right. Cut through the red tape.
And move on.
And then you end up with decisions that maybe not everybody agrees with.
Right.
And people lose trust in the government.
And the source also talked about how, a business leader might be too focused on themselves to be a good public servant.
Well, yeah. And it comes back to that motivation thing, right? What's driving you?
In business, you're driven by
self-interest.
You want to make money for yourself.
Right. For your company.
For your company.
For your shareholders.
But in government, you're supposed to be driven by
the public good.
The public good, what's best for
everyone.
Everybody.
Right. Not just yourself.
And the sources talked about some other qualities that are really important for being a good public servant.
Like what?
Like empathy. Being able to understand and share the feelings of other people.
Right.
Integrity, doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
Yeah.
A real commitment to democracy.
Oh.
And a genuine concern for the well-being of everybody.
And what can happen when you have somebody in charge who's more focused on
themselves
or their business?
Well, the sources say it can lead to some pretty bad outcomes, like policies that only help a small group of people.
Instead of everybody, it can make inequality worse.
Yeah.
Because resources are going to the people who already have a lot.
Right.
Instead of to the people who need them.
Right.
And it can make people lose trust in the government.
Right, because they feel like
they're not being listened to.
Right, that the government is only working for the rich and powerful.
Right, exactly.
So basically what we're saying is that even though business people can have some skills, that would be useful in government.
Yeah, like you said, strategic planning,
Right.
organizational management.
Yeah.
There are also some really big differences between those two worlds. Right.
And those differences can create problems.
Yeah, because the goals are different.
Right.
The stakeholders are different.
Right.
And the motivations are different.
Right.
And if someone's not aware of those differences,
Yeah.
they might end up making decisions that aren't good for everybody.
So the bottom line for you, the listener, is that, just because somebody was a successful CEO doesn't mean they're going to be a good president or prime minister or governor or mayor.
Exactly.
It's just not that simple.
And, it makes me think about all those historical examples.
Yeah.
Of leaders who came from a business background.
Right.
And it's worth asking, did they govern in a way that was more about profits or more about the public good?
Yeah.
And what was the impact of that?
Yeah. That's something to think about.
Yeah. Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And keep sending us your deep dive requests.
Yeah. We love hearing from you.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
This is DigitView.